I never thought my life would intersect with his. Not really. I was just the maid, the girl in the background, the one who scrubbed the marble floors until my reflection stared back at me. His mansion was a world of polished glass and whispered secrets, and I floated through it like a shadow. Nobody looked twice at me. Nobody ever noticed. And that was exactly how I wanted it. But then there was the study. Every night, after I'd finished my duties, I would sneak into that grand room when the house was finally asleep. The shelves stretched so high they seemed to touch the heavens, lined with books that smelled of old money and forgotten time. His leather chair still carried the warmth of his body, the air faint with his cologne. And on that massive oak desk, under the soft glow of a lamp, I would spread out the tattered notebook I kept hidden under my apron. I wrote there, secretly, feverishly, like my soul depended on it. Nobody knew, not the head housekeeper, not the other staff, not even the billionaire himself. Writing was my escape from the suffocating silence of servitude, my rebellion in a house that didn't even know my name. The ink was my voice, my only way of being something more than invisible. Until the night he found me. I didn't hear him at first. My pen scratched across the page, my heart pounding with every stolen word. And then, suddenly, his voice, deep, cutting, impossibly close, broke through the stillness. "What are you doing in my study?" I froze. The notebook trembled under my fingertips. I turned, and there he was. The man himself, the untouchable billionaire, standing in the doorway with eyes that could see straight through me. And in that moment, I knew my secret world was no longer mine. The next few seconds felt like a lifetime. My tongue was dry, my pulse hammered in my ears, and every excuse I had rehearsed in my head for other mistakes, like breaking a glass or dusting the wrong shelf, suddenly vanished. Nothing could cover this. Nothing could excuse the fact that I had dared to sit in his chair, dared to touch his desk, dared to write in a world that wasn't mine. I was just. My voice cracked before I could even finish. He stepped into the study, the door shutting softly behind him. That sound was final, sealing me in with him like a prisoner awaiting judgment. His suit was unbuttoned, his tie loosened, as though I'd caught him in some rare, unguarded state. And yet, even undone, he radiated control, command, power. I clutched the notebook to my chest like a shield. But his gaze was relentless, tracing the worn edges of the paper, the ink stains on my fingers. "You were just what?" he asked, lowering his voice, making me feel even smaller. My mind spun through possibilities: confess, apologize, beg. But instead, the truth tumbled out, raw and fragile. I was writing. The silence that followed was unbearable. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff, didn't even look surprised. He simply studied me, like I was a puzzle he hadn't decided whether to solve or discard. For days I had lived in this mansion, moving quietly through the gilded halls, cleaning up the fragments of his life without leaving a trace of my own. But in that instant, with those 3 words, I had revealed more of myself than I ever intended. "Finally," he said, "show me." My blood turned to ice. The notebook, my secret sanctuary, was not for his eyes. It was filled with dreams I wasn't allowed to dream, with stories that belonged to someone braver, someone freer than me. Yet here he was, demanding entrance to the only piece of myself I had kept untouched. And suddenly, I realized this was no longer just about being caught. This was about rules, his rules, the mansion's rules, the unspoken rules of people like me and people like him. And whether I liked it or not, those rules were about to change. I didn't hand over the notebook right away. My fingers dug into it, as though I could protect the words from spilling into his world. But his command still rang in the air: show me. In the mansion, everything had always been dictated by rules. Rules about when the staff could enter a room, which corridors we were allowed to use, which doors were locked against us. Even our footsteps had to follow an invisible rhythm, never too loud, never too fast. The walls weren't just walls, they were boundaries. And here he was, rewriting the rules before my eyes. He reached for the notebook, his hand steady, unhurried, as if he already knew I would give in. And I did. Slowly, reluctantly, like handing over a piece of my soul. He flipped through the pages, his eyes moving over my messy handwriting, the margins filled with scratches and corrections. I wanted to sink into the carpet, vanish into the silence, anything to avoid the weight of his gaze on my words. "This," he murmured after a moment, isn't what I expected. I couldn't tell if that was good or bad. He closed the notebook and set it carefully on the desk, his fingers lingering for a second too long. Then he looked at me with that sharp, unreadable expression. "You can't be in here at night," he said finally, his tone shifting back into authority. "This room is off limits. Always. Do you understand?" I nodded, my throat tight. "And yet," he tapped the cover of the notebook, "I want you to keep writing. Here. At this desk. Only when I say so." The contradiction made my head spin. He was forbidding me and permitting me in the same breath, setting boundaries only to bend them. His rules weren't about order. They were about control. "From now on," he continued, "you follow my schedule. When I allow you in, you write. When I don't, you stay away. No exceptions." Something in me bristled at the command, but another part, deeper, quieter, sparked with a dangerous thrill. He wasn't just catching me. He was pulling me into something. And with those new rules, the mansion suddenly became a different kind of prison, one where the lock was curiosity and the key was him. The next few nights felt unreal, like I was living someone else's life. By day, I was still the maid, scrubbing, folding, polishing until my back ached. But by night, when the mansion grew hushed and the staff disappeared to their quarters, a new ritual began. His summons would come without warning. Sometimes a single word whispered by the head housekeeper, "Study." Sometimes just a look, a tilt of his head at dinner when I poured his wine. And always, it meant the same thing. I was to bring my notebook and sit at his desk while he worked, while he read, while he watched. I wrote feverishly in those stolen hours. My pen flew across the page, inventing worlds that didn't belong to this mansion. Lovers on windswept cliffs, rebels plotting beneath candlelight, heroines who weren't invisible. All the while, he moved through the study with quiet dominance, pouring himself a drink, flipping through ledgers, or sometimes just leaning against the shelves, his eyes on me. It was a puzzle I couldn't solve. Why did he care? Why allow me to do this, when he could have fired me, silenced me, erased me without consequence? The staff whispered, too. I caught fragments of it in the laundry room, in the kitchens. "She's in the study again." "Do you think she's?" No, he wouldn't. Not with her. But their words only deepened the mystery. The strangest part was the questions he began to ask. Not about chores, not about my work, but about the stories I wrote. Why does your character run away instead of fighting? What does she want most? And what is she afraid to lose? Do you believe courage is born or made? His voice was calm, but each question cut through me like a test I hadn't studied for. And yet, as I answered, I began to see it. He wasn't just reading my words. He was dissecting me. The more I wrote, the more his presence pressed into my thoughts. My characters began to sound like him, to defy him, to fall for him. And I hated it. Hated that even in my secret world, he was everywhere. And then one night, he set down his glass and asked the question that shattered the game. "What do you want, truly? If you could write yourself into a different life, who would you be?" The pen slipped from my fingers, because I didn't know if he wanted an answer or a confession. I stared at him, my lips parting, but no sound came out. The weight of his question hung in the air, heavier than any order he had ever given me. Who would you be? Nobody had ever asked me that before. Not my family, who only cared that I had steady work. Not the other staff, who treated dreams like dangerous luxuries. And certainly not the man whose mansion I scrubbed from dawn until dusk. But he asked. And worse, he waited. I don't know. I whispered at last, my voice barely audible over the crackle of the fireplace. His eyes narrowed. That's not true. Something inside me flared. Shame, anger, longing, all tangled together. My hands trembled as I clutched the notebook. Fine. I snapped, louder than I intended. I'd be someone who matters. Someone people notice. Not a ghost. Not a maid sneaking around in the dark. The words echoed in the study, raw and ugly and utterly unplanned. For a moment, I thought I had destroyed everything. That he would laugh, or worse, dismiss me entirely. But instead, he leaned forward in his chair, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on me with unnerving intensity. You matter, he said quietly. You just don't see it yet. The room tilted. My pulse stumbled. That wasn't the answer I expected. Not from him. Not from anyone. Something shifted in that instant. The study wasn't just a place where I broke the rules anymore. It became a place where truth leaked out, where I was forced to face pieces of myself I had buried. And I saw something in him, too. Behind the billionaire's polished exterior, there was a crack, a shadow. He didn't watch me just out of curiosity. He watched me like a man desperate to remember what it felt like to be alive. That night, I wrote differently. Not to escape, not to rebel, but to reveal. Each word was a confession, a piece of myself I hadn't dared to say aloud. And when he read them, really read them, I knew. This wasn't about writing anymore. This was about him, and me, and the dangerous thread weaving us together. One that could unravel both of our worlds if pulled too tight. The nights that followed blurred into something I couldn't define. I was still the maid, yes, but every time I entered the study, every time he handed me my notebook with that unreadable look in his eyes, I felt like I was walking into a different life. But life in the mansion wasn't a fairy tale. It was a machine, ticking with precision, and I had begun to disrupt its rhythm. The head housekeeper grew suspicious. Her glances lingered too long. Her voice sharpened whenever she assigned me tasks. Once, she caught me slipping out of the study late at night. She didn't say anything then, but the silence in her stare was louder than any accusation. Then there were the staff whispers that grew louder, bolder. They didn't just speculate anymore. They warned. You're playing with fire. He'll use you and discard you. Girls like us don't get endings, only consequences. Their words stung because they echoed my own fears. And yet, every time I thought about pulling away, he did something that pulled me closer. He began leaving notes in the margins of my writing, single words, sometimes questions, sometimes challenges. Coward or survivor? Love or fear? Choose. It felt like a dialogue, a secret language written in ink and silence. But the more he pushed me, the more dangerous it became. One evening, I found him already seated in the study, my notebook open in his hands. He didn't look up as he spoke. You write about freedom as if you've tasted it, he said. But all I see is a girl afraid of her own shadow. My chest tightened. You don't know me. He finally raised his eyes, and the intensity in them made me want to run and stay all at once. That's where you're wrong. I know you better than you know yourself. The words haunted me long after I left the study. Did he truly see me? Or was he shaping me into something he wanted to see? And then, just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, an unexpected twist shook the fragile balance. A page went missing from my notebook. One I hadn't torn out. One I hadn't lost. Someone else had seen it. Someone else had entered the study. And suddenly, it wasn't just about secrets between him and me anymore. Someone was watching. Someone knew. The discovery of the missing page gnawed at me like a secret wound. I searched everywhere, the desk drawers, the wastebasket, even beneath the rug in case it had fluttered away. Nothing. The page was gone, and with it, the safety of my hidden world. When I entered the study that night, he noticed immediately. Something's wrong, he said. Not a question. A statement. I hesitated, then told him. About the missing page, about my fear that someone else had been in the room, reading what was never meant for them. His expression hardened. For the first time since this strange arrangement had begun, he looked less like my quiet interrogator and more like the man the world knew him to be. Ruthless, calculating, dangerous. Who else knows you come here? He asked. The truth burned my throat. The staff, they suspect. He rose from his chair, pacing the study with a storm in his movements. Suspicions can be silenced. Proof cannot. If someone has that page. He stopped, then turned on me, his voice cutting sharp. What did you write on it? My stomach dropped. Because of all the pages, it had to be that one. The one where I had written not about fantasy, not about some imagined heroine, but about him. How his presence haunted me. How his silence was louder than words. How I hated the way my pulse betrayed me every time he stood too close. I couldn't say it aloud, but my silence told him everything. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, he moved closer, so close I could feel the faint heat radiating from his body. You've put us both in danger, he said softly, almost like a confession. Do you understand that? I nodded, though the words felt heavier than I could carry. Then we have no choice, he continued. We find out who took it, before it destroys us both. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. Yet beneath it, I sensed something else, fear. Not just for his reputation, but for me. And as I left the study that night, one thought echoed louder than the rest. I had started this by sneaking into his world. But now, his world, and all its dangers, was seeping into mine. The next days unfolded like a storm. Every corner of the mansion seemed charged with suspicion. The staff avoided me more openly now, eyes darting away, conversations cutting off when I entered the room. I could feel it. Someone knew. Someone had my words, and they were holding them like a weapon. He was relentless. Quietly, carefully, he began to question his own people. His driver, his secretary, even the head housekeeper. I watched as he pulled invisible strings, unraveling loyalties with a single look. But with every move he made, the tension around us grew tighter, more dangerous. And then, the truth came out in the cruelest way possible. At dinner one evening, with the long table set in silver and glass, the head housekeeper placed a folded piece of paper beside his plate. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. My blood ran cold. I recognized the paper instantly, my handwriting, my words. He opened it in silence. Read. Folded it once more. Then his eyes lifted to mine across the table, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. No one else knew what the words meant. No one else had seen the confession hidden between the lines. But he had. Afterward, in the study, he closed the door with deliberate slowness. He placed the page on the desk between us. You wrote this about me. It wasn't an accusation. It was the truth, spoken aloud at last. I felt exposed, raw, stripped of every defense. Yes, I whispered. I did. Silence stretched between us, sharp as glass. And then, instead of anger, instead of dismissal, he said the one thing I never expected. I kept you here because I thought I was studying you. But all this time, you've been writing the pieces of me I've tried to bury. The world tilted. My stories, my words, they weren't just mine anymore. They had pierced him, revealed something even he couldn't control. He leaned closer, his hand brushing the edge of the notebook. Do you understand what this means? You've changed something. Irrevocably. And I did understand. The mansion would never be the same. Neither would I. I wasn't invisible anymore. My words had made me dangerous. That night, for the first time, I didn't write about fantasies. I wrote about the truth, the tangled, fragile, impossible connection between a maid and a billionaire. And I knew, whatever happened next, this story was no longer just mine. It belonged to both of us. The mansion feels different now. The halls are no less grand, the marble no less polished, but I no longer drift like a ghost between its walls. I walk with the weight of someone who has been seen. The head housekeeper no longer glares. She avoids me entirely, as though I've stepped beyond her authority. The staff whisper still, but their voices hold something sharper than curiosity. Fear. And him. He hasn't stopped watching me. But it's not the same gaze as before. It isn't about control anymore. It's about recognition. Some nights, we still meet in the study. I sit at his desk, my notebook open, the lamp casting shadows that stretch across the shelves. But I don't write in secret now. I write knowing that he will read, that he will search for himself between the lines. And sometimes, when I look up, I catch him writing, too. Short notes in his own careful script. His words are harder to decipher, but they're there. What started as rebellion has become something larger. A dialogue carved in ink. A story neither of us can claim alone. Do I know where it leads? No. The mansion is still dangerous. The balance between us still precarious. But I've stopped fearing invisibility. I've stopped fearing my own words. Because even if this ends tomorrow, even if I am cast out, erased, forgotten, I will carry the proof that I was more than just a maid. I was the girl who wrote herself into existence. And he was the man who found me there. So if you're listening to this, wondering if you're too small, too invisible, too afraid to reach for more, remember this. All it takes is one word, one page, one moment of defiance to rewrite your story. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the right time. The story you're afraid to tell might be the one that saves you.